Welcome everyone to the MOOC course on Introduction to Sociology 2. Today we will discuss the functionalist theory of culture. In the functionalist theory of culture, we will begin with the early thinkers of functionalism, Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, and Emile Durkheim. Auguste Comte and Herbert Spencer were the founding fathers of sociology, and Emile Durkheim developed the functionalist school of thought in his works on the rules of sociological method. Moving on, Talcott Parsons and Robert Merton were the functionalist thinkers from the US, and the anthropological school, which focused on functionalism, developed the functionalist theory of culture. And from there, we have thinkers like Branislaw Malinowski and A.R. Radcliffe Brown. Now, to begin with, the functionalist school of thought is something that compares society to a biological organism. So we begin with the idea that functionalism is related to the biological analogy. So the example that the functionalist school provides to us is that the society as a whole is similar to a biological organism. Just as our body has many parts, society too has many parts. And just like the parts of our body function together, coordinate together to make the body function in a healthy manner, similarly, the parts of society as well come together to make society as a whole function in a manner that is progressive and developing. Within the functionalist school of thought, we also have the idea that sometimes when the parts do not coordinate or when they do not function properly, at those times, there are dysfunctions that occur in society, and that leads to a pathological situation. So in order for the society as a whole to function properly, we need each of the parts to do their own part. Now, coming to the functionalist theory of culture in particular, we will begin with the idea of kinship. Kinship is an entity that exists in all societies, regardless of how modern or how primitive they may be, regardless of religion or culture. However, we have noticed that kinship in tribal societies plays a very primary role in every aspect of life. Therefore, whenever we begin with the functionalist theory of culture, and when we begin the study of tribes, we have to begin with a study of kinship in tribes. Therefore, A.R. Radcliffe Brown begins with his study of the African tribes, a section of the African tribes, such as the Bathonga tribe, and he has studied the kinship patterns in these tribes. To begin with, A.R. Radcliffe Brown has discussed the idea of how the relationship between an uncle, a maternal uncle, and his uterine nephew is a very important relationship in the Bathonga tribe in Africa. This relationship between the uncle and the nephew has both formal as well as informal elements. The nephew, the uterine nephew, is allowed to take a great degree of advantage with his uncle and with the relationship that he has with his uncle. So he's entitled to a lot of things. He is, even after the uncle dies, there are ritual aspects to his relationship with his uncle, to which allows the nephew to access a number of things which the uncle used to own. In the informal aspect of the nephew's relationship with the uncle, we find that the nephew throughout his life has access to the uncle's property, has access to the food that the uncle may consume, has access to the uncle in a very informal manner. On the other hand, if you look at the formal aspect of the nephew's relationship with the uncle, after the uncle dies, the nephew in the funeral rites has a duty to steal some of the food and run away as a part of the ritual, as a part of the funeral ritual, which only goes to show that throughout his life and even beyond his death, the relationship between the uncle and the nephew is a very special one, and which entitles the younger nephew to a lot of privileges. Now, A.R. Radcliffe Brown describes this as an extension of the son's relationship with his mother. Any person's relationship with their mother is filled with affection and filled with nurturing, and A.R. Radcliffe Brown says that it is this aspect of nurturing and affection which extends not only to the mother, but to the entire kin group of the mother, which is why the nephew has a lot of advantage which he can take with his maternal uncle, which he may not be able to take with his paternal uncles or aunts. Not only with his uncle, but even the entire kin group of the mother, which means the mother's ancestors, the mother's gods, even the cows that he receives from the mother's side, has a special place in a child's life. So in the tribal society, we find that the relationship that a child has with his mother or her mother extends beyond the mother and into the entire universe that the mother comes from. This is next we go to the idea of collective entitlements and the access of hordes. So in the functionalist theory of culture, we will study how kin groups form hordes. Hordes is an idea that A.R. Radcliffe Brown has developed to refer to groups of people who share a bond, be it by blood, be it by marriage. They share a bond, and they also have access to common property, common land, common natural resources, and this access to property is limited by their kin group. So anyone who violates that access, anyone else any outsider who tries to make a claim to that property must be penalized. And this idea of a group of kin who have access to a certain set of natural resources also develops the idea of the functionalist theory of culture. It shows us how kinship plays a deeply functional role in tribal society. Therefore, we say that in tribal society, kinship is primary. Kinship determines one's economic relationships, kinship determines one's social relationships, even one's political relationships. So one's access to power is also determined by kinship. Who one will trade with is determined by kinship. And what the culture will be like is dependent on the kinship structure of that culture. Therefore, kinship plays a very important role in tribal culture, and whenever we study the functionalist theory of culture, we must begin with the idea of kinship. Moving on, we have the idea of rite de passage, which is a French word, the English for which is rites of passage. Now, rites of passage are rituals and rites which are associated with the initiation that people go through after a certain age. Within the Indian scenario, we have the Janeu ceremony, which is celebrated by Hindu people when they reach a certain age. They accept a holy thread, a sacred thread, and that is surrounded by ritual practices and ceremonies. We have the idea of the Annaprashan or the rice eating ceremony, in which the child after the age of 6 months is initiated into the rice eating culture through certain rituals, rites, and ceremonies. We have the rite of marriage. Marriage is a universal rite which is practiced across cultures, and it is also a rite of passage. It is also a rite of passage which initiates the bachelor into the life of a householder, into the married life, into a life of responsibilities, and into the life of a person who nurtures the rest of society. So the duties of a householder are immense, and marriage is that rite of passage which pushes a person into that realm of one's life where one begins to take on the duties of a householder. In tribal cultures, we find that the rites of passage are an important part in any individual's life. It is through rites of passage that an individual is initiated into the existing culture of the tribe, into the ancestral culture of the tribe, and it is through rites of passage that the individual takes on the responsibility to continue that culture into the next generation. Status, which is composed of rights and duties, is also transferred through the rites of passage. Entitlements as well as duties come together to form the status of an individual. When an individual receives certain entitlements from his ancestors, it also comes with a set of duties. And when one individual performs these duties, fulfills these duties, he develops his own status within that society. And through the rites of passage, an individual has access to both rights as well as duties, entitlements as well as duties. Now, the function of rites of passage. Rites of passage sustain cultures. It is through rites of passage that we can maintain a certain harmony in society, and we can maintain distinction between one who is initiated and one who is not, between one who has been cultivated to perform certain responsibilities and one who is yet to be cultivated. Therefore, rites of passage are important for sustaining that culture, to sustain that distinction. It is also important to note that rites of passage are a moment of liminality. These are moments of transition, when a person is transitioning from one phase of his life to another, from one phase where he is responsible for fewer things to a phase where he is responsible for more things. Therefore, rites of passage or any moments of transition are involved with an idea of liminality. Liminal phases are also phases of vulnerability. These are moments when an individual is vulnerable, when an individual is malleable, when he is neither here nor there. Therefore, he lacks a concrete status, a concrete identity at that liminal moment, during the moment of the rite of passage. Ceremonies and rituals of rites of passage is something we have noticed which continues beyond tribal societies, beyond ancient societies, and into modern societies as well. Regardless of whether a society is religious or secular, regardless of whether a society is primitive or modern, rites of passage, ceremonies, and rituals are something we see across cultures. We may say that it is only in religious societies that rituals are observed. However, if we look at secular societies, the national flag is an emblem across nations. It is an emblem across societies. So even if we modernize, even if we change from what we used to be, even if cultures themselves change, the aspect of rites, the aspect of rituals remain across cultures, across time. Next, we will move to the idea of social institutions, and we will see how social institutions play an important role in the functionalist theory of culture. Social institutions, the main role that they play is the role of a legitimizing factor. Today, we do not accept power from anybody and everybody. That is because institutions exist which give power to certain specified individuals who have authority. Unless a person has authority, we do not listen to that person. If a person demands our attention for no reason, without any authority, chances are we will neglect that person. However, if a person's position, status is legitimized through a social institution, we are obligated to listen to that person. We are obligated to do as he demands or she demands, oftentimes. So social institutions play a deeply legitimizing role, and without this role of social institutions, there would not be proper order in society. Social institutions, therefore, are also involved in the maintenance of social order. Now we will also look at how social institutions have a role to play in resolving social conflicts. The maintenance of social order and the resolution of social conflicts go hand in hand in creating functions that institutions perform in cultures. Now, conformity to social institutions also helps in prevention of deviances. While deviances have often been seen as functional by theorists such as Durkheim, on the other hand, an excessive amount of deviances also leads to pathological situations. Institutions are also methods of expressing redressal against those who perform these deviances, against transgressions. If anyone is offended in any form, then the institutions exist to help in the redressal of those offenses. Social institutions are also a means of achieving the aims of social reproduction of individual, family, and cultures. We should remember that social institutions exist to ensure that cultures themselves are reproduced. Cultures are reproduced through the reproduction of individual, through the reproduction of family, and the values that the families and cultures and individuals represent. Institutions also perform protective functions. They protect access to land, they protect natural resources and the community. Because institutions exist, not everyone is allowed access to all kinds of places. Indigenous cultures are protected. Indigenous rights are protected because of the existence of certain social institutions. Next, we will discuss the functions of economic systems in tribal societies and how this relates to the functionalist theory of culture. Here, we will discuss Malinowski's account of the Kula trade among the Trobriand islanders. Malinowski was an anthropologist who studied the Trobriand islanders in New Guinea, and there, among the Trobriand islanders, he discovered an indigenous form of trade which exists among them, which is different from the modern industrial capitalist form of trade. This form of trade Malinowski has discussed in his book Agronauts of the Western Pacific, and this form of trade is known as the Kula form of trade. In the Kula form of trade, Malinowski has shown how the Trobriand islanders give greater importance to kinship and to supernatural beliefs rather than to ideas of money. If we compare the Kula form of trade with the modern capitalist form of trade, we will find a very fundamental difference. The modern industrial capitalist form of trade is dependent entirely on currency, on money. However, in the Kula system, we do not have the use of such modern systems of currency and money which have international recognition beyond national boundaries. This is a primary difference, and the secondary difference is that the Kula system is based primarily on kinship and belief in supernatural factors, which is not something we always find in the modern capitalist system. There is also a belief in magic in the Kula system, and this belief in magic one can often compare to our belief in science, because magic is not by default good or bad. Magic simply exists for us to wield as per our orientations. Just like science by default does not have a moral value, science is not good or bad. Science already exists and it exists for us to use as per our orientations. If we may describe the Kula trade, we could say that Malinowski found in the Trobriand Islands there were a circle of islands. A circle of islands existed and this formed a ring of islands. In the ring of islands, Malinowski found that the Trobriand Islanders traded with two specific kinds of shells. There was one kind of shell called the Sulava, which was made of red shells and which was made in the form of necklaces. There was another kind of shell called the Mwali, which was made of white shells and which was made in the form of bracelets. Malinowski discovered that in the ring of islands, the Sulava, which is the red shell necklaces, they traveled in a clockwise direction. And the Mwali, which is the bracelets made of white shell, they traveled in an anti-clockwise, in a counterclockwise direction. This trade deeply involved the use of these two kinds of shells, but these two kinds of shells were not used in the way that we use money in the modern economy. In the Kula system, trade only occurred among people who had hereditary ties of trading with one another. One couldn't just enter the Kula system from outside and start trading. Trade in the Kula system occurred through ties of kinship. People knew each other. People traded with each other for generations. And these hereditary ties brought them together across generations to continue this Kula system of trade. Now, if we compare this to the modern economy, we would fail to find any economic logic in this. However, we must understand this as a part of the tribal economy, as a part of the indigenous economy of the Trobriand Islanders, and then it would make complete sense to us. Within the Kula system of trade, rites and rituals also played an important role, and this is something which gave a certain degree of symbolic and cultural value to the Kula system of trade. Now, the difference between the money that we use in modern economy and the shells that were used in the Kula system, there is a big difference between the two. Therefore, in the Kula system, we have this idea of trading with shells, with the help of shells, bartering, while also keeping the movement of the shells ongoing. And in the modern economy, we have the idea of trading with money. But there is a big difference between the two. And when we are studying the functionalist theory of culture, we must address these kinds of indigenous systems of trade because they show us the importance of kinship, they show us the importance of belief in supernatural factors, they show us the importance of tradition that is maintained across generations. And they also show us the functions that these institutions perform. This economic institution has a great function to play, has a great role to play, and a function to perform in the maintenance of the society of the Trobriand Islanders. Towards the end of our discussion, we will discuss the analysis, a complete analysis of the functionalist theory of culture. First of all, satisfaction of primary needs. So the main function of culture is the satisfaction of needs. Needs may be primary and secondary. The primary needs are, of course, needs for nourishment, need for shelter, and need for reproduction. These are the needs that exist across the species, across all living creatures. However, human society has needs beyond these. Human society has cultural needs, and that leads to the formation of institutions, as we have discussed before. So man does not satisfy the primary needs directly. If a dog or a cat is hungry, he simply looks for food and eats it. However, when a human being is hungry, he tries to earn money to buy the food that he may eat. So a human being does not satisfy his primary or his secondary needs directly. Now this requires, in order to exploit nature, in order to exploit our own nature, in order to exploit our society and earn out of it, we need both technical and social skills. Technical skills exist which form material value, and social skills exist in order to make use of that value and earn money. And both technical and social skills have a symbolic value. If we may give an example, technical skill could be related to the farmer's ability to farm his field. but the social skill is related to the farmer's ability to sell the produce that he farms from his field. So both technical and social skills are necessary, and both of them have a great symbolic cultural value, which is then useful for maintaining the culture, and this is precisely the function that culture performs in societies. Now, culture thus develops an instrumental reality for satisfaction of primary and secondary needs. Reality is thus made useful and instrumental by our culture, and through that reality, we are satisfying our primary and secondary needs. Instrumental imperatives of culture may be economic, normative, through the organization of force, and political in nature. This means that culture has economic needs to fulfill, culture has normative needs to fulfill, norms meaning rules which are maintained in society. So cultures maintain these rules. We also have the organization of force through culture. So in every culture, there is an organization of force, there is an organization of power, and that is a function that is performed by each culture. The culture also performs political needs. Systems of belief that arise out of spiritual experiences, fears, and necessities are also associated with cultures and the functions that cultures perform. So in every culture, human beings have spiritual needs. Human beings have needs that arise out of devotion, that arise out of fear, or that arise out of necessities. And cultures allow us to fulfill these spiritual needs. Finally, the performance of military, juridical, and economic and ceremonial functions by various members of a kin group in a culture also have a role to play in the sustenance, in the continuation of that culture. Therefore, when we analyze the functionalist theory of culture, we will primarily look at the importance of needs, the quality of needs, and the way in which needs are fulfilled in every society. And the main function of culture is the fulfillment of that need, of such needs. And these needs are fulfilled by economic institutions, by rites of passage, by rituals, by kinship, and by various other factors which are all parts of a culture. In conclusion, we will briefly recapitulate all the aspects of culture that we have discussed so far. First of all, we have studied the role of culture in satisfying needs. When we are studying the functionalist theory of culture, the main function of culture that we will look at is the function of satisfying needs. These needs may be social or organic. We have seen how kinship plays an important role in cultures, and the function of kinship is manifold. Kinship sustains society. Kinship leads to creation of bonds, creation of obligations, which maintain the social order. Kinship also leads to rituals of succession. Kinship leads to methods of inheritance. We inherit based on the kinship we share with our ancestors. Next, we have the function of rites and rituals. Rites and rituals are useful for maintaining social order. Rites and rituals are also useful for initiation of individuals in order to reproduce the culture. So individuals and groups are initiated into the culture through rites and rituals, and by being initiated, they are given the responsibility of taking the culture forward. And they also have an aspect of vulnerability and liminality, which we have discussed before. These vulnerable and liminal moments, which are moments of transition from one phase to another, allow individuals to restructure themselves based on the social demands of that existing culture. Each culture has its own specific kind of demand from its individuals, and individuals are able to shape themselves according to these cultural demands based on the rites and rituals that they go through, the rites of passage that they go through, in order to reach that phase in which they are supposed to perform certain responsibilities. We have already discussed that institutions play a legitimizing role in all societies. Without institutions, we would not have a proper order in society, we would not have systems of authority in society, and if everyone were to demand their own space of power and authority, there would be complete chaos in society. So in order to maintain social order, we have institutions in place which legitimize people, which give them authority to perform certain actions, and with authority comes responsibility. It is important to have institutions, it is important to have these structures of institutions because they allow certain degree of legitimacy, and with it, they impose responsibilities on the people who have access to that legitimacy. Without these institutions, there would be no responsibility of the people involved. There would be chaos. Next, we have the economic systems. In the economic systems, we have primarily studied the tribal cultures. We have studied how in tribal cultures, economic systems which are different from the modern industrial capitalist form of economy, where the use of money may be different, where the use of money may not even exist, where kinship and belief in supernatural factors may be far more important than the use of money. If we look at the modern industrial capitalist system as well, kinship or familiarity at any rate plays an important role. Therefore, we must emphasize that no matter how much we move away from indigenous cultures or primitive cultures, no matter how much we move towards modern industrial cultures, the factors of kinship, rights, institutions, and economic systems based on these kinship and other factors continues to play an important role. In the end, we will discuss the final aspects of the functionalist theory of culture. We will briefly look at how culture plays an important role in fulfilling needs. And these needs may be those of kinship, they may be social, they may be political, they may be economic, and they may be cultural. Each of these needs are fulfilled by cultures through rites, through rituals, and through institutions that are in place. These institutions could be kinship, family, marriage, and moving on to more modern cultures, we have institutions like the education system, the health system, and each of these institutions have an important role to play in maintaining the culture as a whole. Therefore, in the functionalist theory of culture, we have studied how cultures fulfill needs which are social, economic, political, and of various other kinds. These needs are fulfilled through the rites, through rituals, and through social institutions. And that is how we have concluded the study of the functionalist theory of culture. Thank you.